Hello and welcome to the 8th of our ACCA F5 lecture recaps. This one was on demand and costs. So the first thing we looked at was demand, and we're particularly interested in factors influencing demand. Okay, so what influences demand? Well, the market type is the first thing that will influence demand. So there's various market types. A monopoly will be where there's one major player in the market. That firm sets the price because they're the only player. So if the people want to demand the product, they'll have to pay the price that the monopolist sets. There's no competition when there's a monopoly, and I'm sure we can all think of various monopolies in our home countries. Monopolistic competition, well, this is where there's many suppliers of similar products. Oligopoly, that's several large players in the market. There can be collusion. So in the UK, we think of supermarkets. Okay, several large players in the market. They can collude and set prices in that way. Or there could be perfect competition. Perfect competition is where there is many suppliers all supplying the same product. The consumer has perfect knowledge and the good is homogeneous, i.e. it's the same. Say potatoes. Potatoes are the same for everybody. So perfect competition is where there's many suppliers. The consumer has perfect knowledge of all of those suppliers and there's a homogeneous good. The good is the same everywhere. So therefore, the consumer can choose easily who they want to supply that good. Okay, other influences will be the costs, and that's why the business needs to have a good understanding of their costs. Competitors, you need to understand your competitors because that will influence demand for your product. Substitute goods, if businesses can easily substitute or consumers can easily substitute your good for someone else's, well then it may be that your demand could be less than you expected. Also quality, you need to decide, do the consumers want quality from your good? That brings us to the price elasticity of demand. So the price elasticity of demand tells us by what percentage will demand change for a certain percentage change in price. So if you put your price up by a certain percentage, how much will your demand change by? The calculation for it is this, the percentage change in demand over the percentage change in price. So therefore, if the change in demand is more than the change in price, the result will be greater than 1. Okay, that means that your price elasticity of demand is elastic. So for a small change in price, you get a larger change in demand, i.e. price elasticity of demand is elastic. On the other hand, if you get a small change in demand for a large change in price, your price elasticity of demand is inelastic and it might be worth your while increasing the price because it's not going to affect demand that much. So that's the price elasticity of demand. We also looked at our demand curve, which was this. We knew that it's downward sloping because if you charge a higher price, your demand will go down. Okay, so the different elements on this were P equals A minus BQ is the equation. That is the equation for a straight line. So we just need to be aware that P is the selling price. A is the price where demand equals 0. So at what price will people say, no, sorry, that's too much. I'm not going to demand that product. B is the price elasticity, and that will determine the slope of the line, i.e. how quickly your demand will go down for changes in price. And lastly, Q is the quantity demanded at whatever price you are looking at. So just be aware of how demand affects price or price affects demand. Okay, so costs then, that brought us on to look at. We knew that our total costs equals our fixed cost plus our variable costs. So those are the two cost elements. Our total cost then equals total fixed costs plus our variable cost per unit times the quantity sold. And that stands to reason. Our total variable cost will be the variable cost per unit times the number of units that we actually sell. So we can graph that as well. Okay, so we have our fixed costs at point A. That's why the intersection isn't at 0. The axis on the left is total costs. the axis down below is the quantity demanded. So at point A, we still have to cover our fixed costs. That's why we don't have an intersection at 0. We still have to cover our fixed costs at point A. So as the quantity goes up, we have variable cost times the quantity, and that will increase our total costs. So the equation then is y equals a plus bx, upward sloping this time, but still a straight line. Y equals our total costs. A equals our fixed costs, which we still have to cover even if there's no demand or no quantity produced. B equals our variable cost per unit. And X equals our quantity sold. So be aware of how our cost function sits together. And we look at incremental costs in our next section. So that was our session on demand and costs.